Welcome back, recruits. I'm Chris Nance with the Northern California Ghostbusters, and today we are finally going to show you how to build a hero proton pack. But to do that, we're actually going to have to start at step 0. What we are actually going to be covering today specifically is I'm going to be going over all of the parts and shapes of a proton pack and their names, and I'm going to be showing you where they are, what they look like, and where they go on the pack itself. And then once we get going in the future, we will actually be showing you a little bit more detail on how to mount and get to all of the different parts of the pack. So let's get going. You may have noticed we are very specifically focusing on the pack so far. And I've had this Max Factory wand hanging out in the background the entire time. We will be talking much more about the thrower in the future. I tend to break down proton pack builds into 3 distinct parts. You've got the pack, you've got the wand, and then you've got the electronics. And that is pretty much how we're going to be formatting this as we go. We're going to be focusing very primarily on the pack and how to do everything that you need to do with the pack. Then the thrower and how to do everything that you need to do with the thrower. And then we'll be showing you the proper electronics install for everything, pack and thrower, all as sort of separate chunks. So a hero build is a prop replica that is trying to closely replicate the hero prop used on screen in a film. It is not a term that's specific to proton packs. It is a term that is specific to film props in general. Good example would be like the Fifth Element. Fifth Element had a bunch of practical props, so the most famous of which would be the Zorg ZF-1, the crazy, like, all-in-one sci-fi gun that they introduced, early on in the movie. They show it on screen shooting bullets and nets and freeze rays and flamethrowers and darts and everything, right? So that was not just one prop doing all of those things. That was like 6 or 8 different props that were all built to look exactly the same, and have the same kind of quality of parts used for its construction, but they all had different functions built into them. That also specifically applies to proton packs, though. Between Ghostbusters 1 and 2, we have some very specific grades of proton pack that we see. In the very first movie, we really only see 2. We see the hero, which would have been built off of a fiberglass shell with a bunch of random parts that were scavenged from an aircraft salvage yard, basically just strapped to it. And then the actual lighting and stuff is just a bunch of 84 era electronics jammed in underneath that shell. So one of the more difficult parts of the build can be finding sort of exacting either the same sourced pieces because they used a real world piece, or something that is identical to the used part. Thankfully, we've got 40 years of fans doing the research for us at this point. So we have a pretty good idea on the dimensions and everything. And then also, even more so, thankfully, we have these legacy sequels coming out. If for no other reason, I'm a big fan of the new films coming out simply because in order to make the props for those films, they went to the fans who make all of those props, and they basically sourced all of those parts from the community, which means that now all of these community-made parts are screen accurate. So a majority of what you see is the shell. Everything that you see here that's missing from here is just stuff that bolts to the shell. The shell itself is basically just one big fiberglass cavity, actually specifically mounts to what we call the motherboard. It just uses these 4 simple L brackets. If you've been following along with our channel and watching the show for a while, you've seen a similar kind of setup for the Redman Mobo. Now, the motherboard itself, and as you can see, I've got this all kind of set up already, mounts to the Alice frame, and that's done with a set of 1/4-20 bolts. And I don't know if you can get down in here, Greg, some 1-inch spacers. And that is basically makes it wearable but then also the motherboard. As you can see here, from me kind of picking it up and showing you, on this build specifically, I have my speaker and then I have my batteries all kind of attached and built to the motherboard already. So the motherboard also kind of acts as a really solid place to start mounting your electronics, sort of your inner workings for your Proton Pack, basically. Once you sort of start getting to that step. Now, by comparison, this is the exact same shell, also a GB Fans fiberglass shell. However, as you can see now, by comparison, this is the one that needed some more baking time. This whole thing needs to be completely sanded and painted. There are some holes in it that are not quite up to snuff that we will be fixing. So that's going to be a really good and important video, I think, because we're going to show you when you mess something up. I promise you it's going to happen. It's not the end of the world. We're going to show you how to fix it. Now we're getting to the actual anatomy of the Proton Pack. We've got the shell, we've got the power cell, you have your EDA, those are your EDA discs. You have the cyclotron, so right down here, which sits atop what the fans call the synchronous generator. So basically all of this section below the cake pan on top is going to be considered your synchronous generator, even all the way up to here where your Clippard sits. Then you have the actual crank generator box, or the crank gen box. You'll hear it referred to as a few different things actually, like the crank generator, the gearbox, the vacuum pump. There's the end filter. Now, on some fiberglass shells, in fact on most fiberglass shells, this is a separate part that attaches kind of from the inside of the pack like most of the other things. On our shells, on these GB Fans shells, it is cast in. Reason for that is it is it's just such a compound shape that attaches in a weird place in a way that it's much more difficult to attach it as a separate piece. However, it's easier to make it look nice as a separate piece. That said, it's not such a huge difficulty to do it nicely when it's cast in like this. And I just like these GB Fans shells. They're really well made. We have the actual parts that attach to the Proton Pack. So first and foremost, it's probably one of the most obvious things that is more instantly recognizable. Here, I'll even put the shock mount on. There's your bumper, right? So sits down here across the face of the cyclotron, kind of partially obscures some of your lighting effects. It very specifically, and we will cover this in greater detail when we get to this point on Greg's pack, but it very specifically will end up mounting sort of between these plates on the side, on the synchronous generator. Next up is going to be your ion arm, and it's probably going to be a little bit more recognizable if I do this and put the end cap on it. So yes, the end cap is a separate piece from the ion arm. Going down from the ion arm, we have the injector tubes. Now, this is going to be much more recognizable if I hold them here below the power cell where they would normally be living. And they would normally have the red and blue tubing coming out of the bottom of them and into the synchronous generator. The filler tube, super duper simple. If I lift, you can see right below where it's sitting, exactly where its hole is. It just sits on that lower step, so sort of below the EDA box, adjacent to everything going on with the injector tube and the ribbon cable right there. Right next door to it, we have your beamline tube. Now, I have half of a Clippard elbow stuck in there right now, just so you can see that it's separate, it's different from the filler. So, first of all, what you will notice is how would you describe that shape, Greg?
Like a circle-ish diamond, like a...
There's a couple of wavy lines.
Yeah,
diamond.
a sort of diamond shape.
It's different than this.
Yeah. Now, there's a reason for that. If you look down here in this corner, See this rounded corner light right there? What you will notice is on these nice little aluminum beam lines that have the sort of diamond-shaped base cut on it already for you, they are made to sort of corner in on that round corner, which will always kind of perfectly place them, which is a nice little bonus. You have your beam line, which has a Clippard elbow installed on the top of it and runs a blue tube up to your hydrogen gas actuator, or HGA. Once again, just super simple single screw mount point on it. And that lives right up here. I have the fittings on here already. These are real pneumatic fittings that you can still get on the market, and we'll go into more detail on how to source and find them later. Next up, we've got the PPD, which is this little piece of tubing with a cut angle. Up next, we've got your vacuum line. A very simple little piece, sits directly above the Clippard, and it will be a lot more recognizable as soon as I do this, because it is where a piece of splitless loom just goes right into, like that, from the crank generator there. Up next, we have the crank knob, thusly the name crank generator. These are basically like a vintage military radio knob that they made in a bunch of different like variations and sizes and stuff. Hard to find when I was first building a Proton Pack in 2016. So in the first Ghostbusters, the crank knob is a gray like this, and then in the second one, it's a black like these. Next up is gonna be your Clippard. Now, Greg and I were just talking about this off camera for a second. The correct models of Clippard are going to be the R331 and the R701. However, what configuration those Clippards are in is going to depend on which pack you're looking at. Like the Stance pack has a 331 on the pack and a 701 on the thrower. I know that one off the top of my head. I think the Spangler pack just has two 701s on it. I don't know offhand. I'd have to look at the reference. But basically, like, this is where the importance of reference comes in. So you need to be able to look very closely at these specific parts on these packs and go, okay, is it this detail or is it this detail? And that's gonna be how you figure out, like, okay, I'm gonna go with this part for this, basically as you go. Here we have the full booster tube assembly, which is actually made up of 3 parts. So you have your booster tube, you have your booster tube plug, and then you have your booster tube ladder. Booster tube sits right on this angled surface, plug goes in the top, and then booster tube ladder goes on the top of the booster tube. Yeah, this is the very last piece. I have a Fincher Technology GB1 ribbon cable here. Now, you have your ribbon cable clamp that mounts to the synchronous gen right here above the cyclotron, comes around here to a clamp that screws into the booster tube ladder and then disappears through this big hole here in the shell. And that's it. That's pretty much. There is one last anatomical piece that I do not have here, and we will cover it. That's the V-hook, just the little hook mechanism that your wand actually hangs from, but it would normally fit right here on the side of this box. That is pretty much a basic rundown of the full sort of anatomy of a 1984-1989 Proton Pack. We will go into further details as we go along, specifically as we get to each part and how to install it in turn. So, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, smash that bell, turn on notifications, play it for your local church group. Something that's been coming together as a really great resource so far has been our Discord. Please, if you have a project that you're ready to share with us, join the Discord, hop in there, share what you're building, and ask for advice, because we have some really awesome, knowledgeable folks in there already, and it's been a lot of fun actually seeing everybody's progress and helping them kind of figure out the next step of things. So until next time, recruits, I'm Chris Nance with the Northern California Ghostbusters, and we'll see you later.
And then, party times.